All right, welcome back. So we are just going to keep trucking along through the animal kingdom, and we're going to talk about two phylum on this one. We're going to talk about the mollusk and the annelids, and some people really love the molluscum because it's a lot of tasty critters in that one too. So let's kind of get into it and remind ourselves where we are. So we're kind of going in this middle section right here. So you're probably most familiar with the Lophotrochozoan protozoans. So that's a lot of a mouthful of words right there. But we're going to see with these, you're going to see they're going to have a flexible body plan that leads to an abundance of the species diversity. Now, we're going to spend some time on the mollusks, which are going to be mostly your marine. So you'll think about your squid, your octopus, your clams, and your snails fall into this group. So you'll see some difference, and then you'll see some of the shells and stuff. And then we'll talk about the annelids a little bit, which are your earthworms and your leeches. Now, what's really cool about mollusks is they're kind of power horse too. About 25% of all known marine species are mollusks, which I find that really cool. Now, what's unique about these guys, these two phylum we're going to talk about, they exhibit bilateral symmetry. We're starting to see the true head regions, the cephalozytes, and they are tripoblastic. So let's talk first about the mollusk. Now, we're going to find these mostly in marine environments, but you can find some in terrestrial and freshwater environments, and some are also terrestrial. Now, some are going to have the soft bodies, but some of them actually can secrete that hard calcium carbonate shell, but not all of them. So think of like the clams and the mussels, and that carbonate shell is the same thing like the lobsters and stuff used to use too. So it kind of provides a lot of structure and protection. Now, with these guys, you're going to see that they're unsegmented, so they do not break it up in the groups like we saw with the arthropods. Now, they are the second most diverse group. This mollusk is about 80,000 species. As I mentioned, about 25% of all marine species, which I find that cool. Now, you're going to see some niches here, but they're going to have this common body plan where they're going to have a visceral mass, which is pretty much like their body and their organs. They're going to have some form of a foot that they're going to use for movement, and then a mantle, which is going to be secreting of their shell. And it's divided into 8 classes, which we'll kind of hit on most of them. So let's look at the anatomy just a little bit. So as I mentioned, it's going to have this foot region, which is at the bottom, and it's going to be its primary locomotor structure and the ventral most organ. Now, depending on what it is, it's going to vary in both shape and function. So we have like a snail anatomy right here. Now, we're also going to have this visceral mass, which is this middle area right here, and that's going to be your region for internal organs. So here you'll find the digestive tract, the nervous tract, excretory organs, reproductive and respiratory systems, all in this area right here. So we're starting to get more and more complex. Now, the mantle is going to overlay right here. It's going to overlay the visceral mass and secrete that calcium carbonate shell, provides protection. So we're getting over there. We're going to have to go through and get that respiratory system. So we're going to start to see gills form. Boom, boom. And these are going to be, if you're respiratory, especially if you're aquatic, you're going to use gills, and you'll see a different type for the terrestrial ones. Now we're going to start to get these radullas, or scraping structures at the mouth. So we're starting to see the primary teeth start to form. And with these, you're going to see most of them are going to be dioecious, and they're going to utilize external fertilization. So let's talk about some of the classes of phylum Mollusca. So classes Caudophobida, Sologastreus include the shellworms, worm-like animals found in the benthic bottom of the marine environments. So these guys up here on the top, not that great looking, kind of gross looking almost. They lack the shell, eyes, tentacles, and excretory organs, but there's enough similarity both on molecular wise and stuff to where they're classified with the mollusk. Not a lot of information on these guys. Now, class Monoplacophora, they're going to have a single cap-like shell. So I'm trying to find a picture of each of these that covers the dorsal part of the body, which is going to be underneath right there. They're going to have the very simple digestive system and multiple pairs of excretory organs, 1 pair of gonads, and multiple gills. Kind of simple right there. Now we're starting to get to some that you might recognize, the class Polyplacophora, which are your chitons, What's unique about these, they're going to bear 8 of these limey plates that make up the dorsal shell right here. People actually confuse these with trilobites a lot, and they're going to have a broad ventral foot on the bottom, and they possess an open circulatory system. Not a lot of information on these guys. Like I said, sometimes the book kind of focuses more on the stuff that you're more used to seeing. Like this class right here, class bivalvia, which is probably another good tasty class we love. Now bivalves means we have 2 shells. So this is where you're going to have your clams, your oysters, your mussels, and your scallops, some of your favorite things if you love to eat shellfish and a lot of seafood. You'll find them both in marine and freshwater habitats, and you're going to see that these shells are going to be hinged at this back region right here. Now, what's unique about these guys, they're filter feeders, so they do not have those teeth-like structures, and they use a pair of gills for gas exchange. Now, with oysters, you think about them, they actually deposit what's called narcade, might be saying that wrong, or mother of pearl, around foreign particles, and that when that enters the mantle cavity, and that's how we get the pearls form. Now, here's a video that kind of shows them going through the process of feeding and movement. Quite cool. Now, another class that gets a lot of attention, class Gastropoda, which means stomach foot. So these are going to be your snails, your slugs, and your conchs. Now, with these, they're going to have asymmetrical symmetry, and they usually have this coiled shell here on the top, and this big foot that they use for crawling. Now, more than half the species fall into this class right here, and you can find them in both marine, freshwater environments and terrestrial environments. Now, it says asymmetrical twice. I'm sorry, I just didn't catch that till now. But this is where you start to see those teeth, the radula, that you use for scraping food off the surface. Probably a lot of people's favorite that fall into this group, last group of the mollusks, are the cephalopoda. So this is going to be those that have the cephalopods, or the head foot. So your octopus, cuttlefish, and squid fall into this. A lot of people love to pick these for their favorite invertebrate. This is cuttlefish. They change colors. I think it's quite fascinating. They can be with shells. It's going to be very reduced or absent, depends on the type of species. These guys love to change the color and use it for camouflage. They can adjust it. It's really quite fascinating to find videos of these guys changing it, dancing to, and blending into the environment. Now, they are predators. They're going to have these beak-like jaws underneath and a well-developed nervous system. I love to watch videos of the octopus where they use them to prevent or predict soccer games or winners of certain things, or they put them, I think this is a video, or it's on the end, where they like put things in jars and have the octopus open them to get to their food, which is quite fascinating. And these guys are going to have more complex eyes, and they're going to have a closed circulatory system. Now, they do, on that foot region is where we're going to have these tentacles develop, and they're going to have those suckers on there, and they utilize jet propulsion to move. So these are quite cool. Like I said, a lot of people love to pick these guys for their favorite invertebrate. So let's move on to the next phylum, which is phylum Annelida, which is your worms. So they are going to have segments of equal sizes. I know we've been talking about worms, but we are going to be segmented worms. So your earthworms, your leeches fall into this group. Now, we do find them in multiple environments, both your marine, freshwater, and terrestrial, and about 22,000 species. Now, they do fall in a lot of ecological niches, and they're actually quite important for them. Depending on where they survive will determine how they eat. If they're aquatic, they're going to go through the process of filter feeding. If they're active, especially like the burrowing species, they're going to consume a lot of dirt because they have to graze or hunt. And you'll also see some that are parasitic in there, which because the leeches fall into this group too. So a little brief thing on anatomy, because it's starting to get a little bit more complex. One thing that you can do is you can go through the process of dissecting an earthworm and start to identify some of the very, very circulatory systems are very similar to ours. So with these guys, they reproduce sexually or asexually, depending on the type of species and I guess the environment that they're in. They're going to have their skin that's going to be protected by a cuticle, because you got to prevent from drying out depending on where it's going to live. And then we're starting to see two layers of muscles, that longitudinal and circular. So if you remember when we were talking about the roundworms, they do not have the circular muscle because they kind of just like squirgle all over the place. This is when you think about earthworms and how they kind of inch along. That's because they have both the longitudinal and circular muscles. With this group, we're starting to see a true coelom form with organs, so we're getting more and more complex. So this is like one of the primitive critters that you'll actually go through and dissect sometimes in or majors biology. We see a complete digestive system with a true mouth, pharynx, esophagus, and crop. And we also see a closed circulatory system with this one, with a dorsal and ventral blood vessel that is starting to happen. So you can see the blood vessels supporting our intestine right there. They're going to have multiple hearts, and we're now getting to where we get that more well-developed nervous system. So you're getting more complex. So that's one thing you kind of recognize as we're going through these different lectures. Now there's some diversity right here. There's just a few that I want to talk about. There's class Polychaeta, which are your marine ones. They're going to be broken, have these bristles arranged in clusters on their parapodia. Some are going to be sessile, some live in tubes. Not excited to mention, not a whole lot is talked about on these guys, but I just wanted to introduce them to you. But you're probably used to this group right here, thinking about class Polychaeta, which is going to be your earthworms and your leeches. So you're going to distinguish them by that raised band. So if you think of the earthworms, in the presence of a permanent clitellum, I think I'm saying that right, as well as a small number of reduced chaetae, which are on each of the segments. So if you think about the earthworm, it has that really distinct band, and then you see all those little ones. Kind of hard to see on the leech right here. So like I mentioned, this is going to have your earthworms, which you're probably used to seeing, and then the leeches. Now, leeches have been used for medicinal purposes for thousands of years. It's kind of interesting. If you want to talk about them in the lecture about homeopathic medicine, you're more than welcome to. So not a lot on in the book. I kind of hit on the main points, but here's some review. Like I said, mostly fun videos. And then credit for my images.